Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mondays with Moshe. Tonight, we are honored to have featured Dr. Harry Aponte from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, not too far away. Last week's guest was from Melbourne, Australia, so that's quite a jump. And Philadelphia is just a hop, jump, and a skip away. So thank you, Dr. Aponte, for joining us this evening. Dr. Aponte, I want you to tell us a little bit about who you are. I only learned about you recently. I think, unfortunately, you're not publicized enough. I learned about you in teaching this past semester in Wurzweiler University and happened across your video sessions on psychotherapy.net and promptly watched them and showed them over to my students because of the method of structural family therapy that you use, which you adopted from your adopted, I guess, mentor, Sal Minuchin.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I would have loved to have him on the show, but unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. But Salvador Minuchin was really an adorable therapist. We really adored him and loved to watch him in action. The ease in which he conducted structural family session was just amazing and a breath of fresh air. The humor that he used. I want to know if you can tell us a little bit about some of your humble beginnings that we heard about in watching some of your podcasts and how you came to be Dr. Harry Aponte.
Okay. Whatever you want, that's what I'll try to give you. And don't hesitate to interrupt me if there's anything that you think I'm missing that you think should be emphasized.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, are we going to be have time at the end, towards the end anyway, for questions and answers?
Yeah, so those who have questions are going to use the raise your hand button on the bottom right of their screen. And when we have a pause, we'll take their questions, but I'm sure there will be.
Okay, all right. Are you ready to go?
Let's go. Tell us a little bit about how you became Dr. Harry Aponte and where you really came from.
Okay. I'm Puerto Rican. My family came from Puerto Rico. My parents came from Puerto Rico in the late 20s, and I was born in Spanish Harlem. I was told by my parents, but my memory really is only of earliest memory was of Black Harlem. We lived at 104 West 124th Street, actually. That was 124th and Lenox Avenue, around the corner from 125th Street, where the Apollo Theater was. That was just right around the corner for us. My father was got himself kind of messed up in Puerto Rico because he had a chance for a scholarship to go to the university down there, and he ended up womanizing and drinking and stuff like that, and got himself kicked out in the first year. So he didn't get that much education. My mother was a teacher, but at that time, at least in Puerto Rico, you didn't have to go to college to become a teacher, but that was her interest, and she was the one who encouraged me to go to school and to read and so on. So that was kind of my mentor from early on. I only spoke Spanish at home, never spoke English. So I had to learn English in my neighborhood. And I still can remember being in the street with an African-American kid who wanted to be friends of mine, but I couldn't talk with him very well because I didn't know the language, even though I was born here. And I'd call up my mother, who was on the first floor, and I would from the street, and I'd say, tell my mother what you want to say to me. And then she would say, oh, this is what he's saying to you. So I said, okay, then how do I answer back? And then that's my earliest memory of learning English.
Irony of ironies that your Puerto Rican mother was teaching you how to speak English.
Right.
But can you tell us the story that you told me before the show about the woman who would come over to you on Saturday and offer you a penny? The Jewish woman.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's when we moved to the South Bronx, and I still remember her on Saturdays. She would call me and give me a penny to light. I don't know whether it was a candle or a stove or what it was. I don't remember that. All I know is I had to light it. I had to just do the whole thing, and so that was just part of the feeling I had about entering somebody else's world, because it was clearly very important to her to do that. And it was only in later years that I realized how important it was for her to do that. And I had the opportunity to then be her instrument in doing so. And I was glad I had that opportunity. But it also contributed, by the way, to what I'm going to be talking about today, having to do with crossing boundaries into other cultures, because that was obviously my experience, because I grew up only speaking Spanish, and then I had to learn English in the street from the kids that I was dealing with, and they were all African Americans in Harlem, and then in the South Bronx it was a mixture, because it was originally a Jewish neighborhood that we moved into, but then it became a very mixed neighborhood. There were a lot of Puerto Ricans. There were white kids from the South. That was my best friend, Billy Culpepper, was from the South, and then my mother put me in a Catholic school. And so that was also different from all of my friends, because none of them went to a Catholic school. So that's what I grew up going to Catholic school, where there were just 2 or 3 of us there, a couple of Puerto Ricans and 1 or 2 African-American kids, and the rest of them were Irish. Okay. Wow. On the weekends, the Irish gangs would come into the Puerto Rican neighborhood. There would be the gang fights. And that was also part of my early life experience,
So tell us a little bit about how you got hooked up with Salvador Minuchin and structural family therapy.
Okay, it was 1960 that Sal Minuchin invited me to go to Philadelphia, to come to Philadelphia to work. And that was from a contact that I had with his friend and associate, Braulio Montalvo, another Puerto Rican, who I saw in I think in an ortho meeting in those days, when they had different leaders in the field of family therapy, Virginia Satir and Murray Bowen and other people like that. They were on a panel, and Braulio was talking about what he and Sal were doing in New York. I think they had gone to the Wiltworth School for Boys, and where there were African Americans and Puerto Rican kids. And it was there that he got the idea of involving the families and not having the kids just be in an institution. Okay, and out of that came his book, The Families of the Slums, where he really articulated the structural family therapy model. And I wrote a review of the book when I was at Menninger's for their Menninger Bulletin. And then I started to correspond with Braulio about some of my thinking, and And it was out of that conversation with Braulio that then Sal wrote to me and said, hey, you know, I just moved from New York to Philadelphia, and I'm working in the kind of neighborhood that you grew up in, and I'd like to invite you to come and work with us. So I eventually did come to Philadelphia to work at the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic, which was one of the early Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinics that, when I think it was like 4 or 5 of them were spread around the country at that time, and in earlier years. And that's the clinic that I began working in. And Sal had the creative idea of getting people from the neighborhood and training them to be therapists, people who had not gone to college. That was a very successful effort on his part. But in the process, he then focused more on training and then asked me to be in charge of the clinical part of the child guidance clinic. When I started to take on those responsibilities, I found that the clinic was having a lot of trouble with the community there. And they said they wanted to consult with the clinic and have a committee so that to oversee the work that we do and tell us how to do it right, so that we would relate to the community. And I said, well, you know, I really appreciate, you know, your offer, but you really can't run the clinic. You know, I love to have your ideas, but not you telling us how to do our work. And that created some serious tension between me and the community. And so then I said to myself, well, then I'm going to go out myself, and I'm going to go to the neighborhood and find out who's the most influential people, who are the most influential people in that neighborhood at 17th and Bainbridge. And I eventually met the guy who was the toughest and most articulate member of the neighborhood, and went to meet him, and he had a storefront with a few German shepherds in it. And when I came in, he said, I know who you are. He knew my name. He knew about me already. And he said, I don't really want to talk to you. And I said, well, I want to talk to you because I think we have something in common. It took a little while before I kept going back. Oh. And we eventually ended up in the bars drinking. And then we really got to become friends. And I said to him, you know, Jim, you're very good with the gangs here in this part of South Philadelphia, and you're very influential in the neighborhood, but you don't work with the families. We're very good with the families. You're very good with the kids. So I think we should form an alliance and work together and work with some of these kids who are not attending school and getting themselves in trouble and so on. Well, he said, well, then how do we get to know who they are? I said, well, we'll find out that the Department of Education has records on who's not going to school. And he said, well, I don't know the people there in the hierarchy in that part of the world. I said, well, that's the advantage of you working with me, because I know the superintendent. I have to deal with the superintendent. And I took Jim with me, and we met with the superintendent. And I told him, I said, I'd like for us, for Jim and I to get together and set up a school, you know, an alternative school for kids who don't go to school at all, you know. And the superintendent said, I like the idea, but you can't do the school during school hours. So if you want to set up a school, you have to do it after school hours. I said, oh, well, that's not a problem. And Jim had enough pull in the community of Philadelphia that he got a a radio station to agree to do a telethon to raise money. And
Wow.
we did the raise money. He bought a building. He redid the whole building, and it was an old just row house, and turned it into a little school. And then went to the University of Pennsylvania, to the Department of Education there, and said he wanted African-American students who were working to become teachers for them to get their practicum, some of their practicum teaching in that school. And they said, sure, why not? And so they gave us some of their teachers.
For free.
And
I'm assuming that they didn't get paid for that. So it was a money saver for the school.
well, we got the money to make the school, but after that, we had no more money. So that was it. It was all for us. It was, they were volunteering, but I'm sure this was part of their practicum and they were getting their credits for it,
Sure.
you know. And we then tested these kids, and we made contact with the families. And in a few years, these kids went 2-3 years. They leaped from one grade to several grades beyond where they started. I mean, they really learned. And I remember hiding in the neighborhood so I can watch the kids going into the school that Jim was heading. And what he said to them was that the school starts at 3:30, and at 3:30 I locked the doors. He says this to the families and to the kids who never went to school at all. And once they got to know him, you know, I would see them running to get in there before 3:30.
So what is it? I know, Dr. Aponte, I know you talk about the relationship and therapy being, you know, the main ingredient. What was it about Jim that had these kids wrapped around his finger?
Well, he was a leader. He was somebody that was respected by the neighborhood. You know, everybody knew him in the neighborhood. He didn't get along very well with Frank Rizzo, who was the head of police at the time. And he had some confrontations with the police. He himself had been involved taking drugs in prison and stuff like that before he came to Philadelphia. But when he got there, he was very stern and the man who demanded respect. And he would call the kids by their, you know, Mr. this and Miss that. And they called him, you know, Mr. Lester. And he demanded respect. And if they came to school not having combed their hair, brushed their hair, and come and had decent clothes, he would send them home. He said, you're not going to come back unless you respect yourself. We're not going to have you in the school. You have to respect yourself.
Wow.
So they would come with their mothers begging to be allowed to come back into the school. Remember, these are kids who were not going to school at all.
Wow.
You know?
So he really made a mensch out of these kids.
Absolutely. You know, and I eventually got the program into the clinic when we opened a new office on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania, and we had the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic there instead of at 17th and Bainbridge. Okay, and it was the same kids, but now we're getting them from West Philadelphia, and the parents would come in and they would have evenings where they would do all the cooking, and they would invite people from the neighborhood to come and share the cooking. And they had shows of model where the girls would model clothes, and the girls would come and the parents would come, and they made the clinic part of the community.
Beautiful. So this is real service of the underserved. I mean, real classical social work that you started out on. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming this was before you really started dabbling in structural family therapy.
Well, I learned family therapy. I learned structural family therapy with Sal. I was doing family therapy at the Menninger Clinic, which was purely psychoanalytic, and that was a whole big, hullabaloo there, because I I remember when I went, they invited me to give a talk many years later, and they said, "Oh, you're the guy who caused all the trouble many years ago when you introduced family therapy to the Menninger Clinic." I said, "Yeah, I guess I was. I didn't realize that my reputation came down through the years, and I had a reputation for having caused a bit of a ruckus there." But they eventually accepted it, and they eventually incorporated it into their training there. So that was my introduction to it. And I learned structural family therapy from Sal when I went to the Child Guidance Clinic. And then given my background, I said, I think we really should call this an eco-structural approach to family therapy, because if you are raised in this kind of environment, okay, I knew what it was like. The resources that were available in the community were not usually available or taken advantage of by the people in the community, because they didn't know how to do it, or even when they did know how to do it, they weren't listened to. So that by bringing the kids in, having the school set up, I invited people from the city council, from the state legislature, all African-American leaders of one kind or another to come to the clinic and to look at what we were doing. And so that they would support the clinic, and they would then make the various institutions that they were connected to available to people who had little background and who needed those resources but didn't know how to get them, or didn't know how to use them, or they were really just basically ignored and they weren't paid attention to. So that's why I said, when you live and grow up in that kind of an environment, it's not just what's happening in the family, which was really important, but it's also what's happening in the community.
Right.
Affects your life, your daily life. So that needs to be incorporated.
Is there a concept in family therapy to be able to provide family therapy for communities on a broader, more macro level?
Well,
Just family
I began writing at that time on about the eco-structural approach to family therapy. I eventually wrote a book, Bread and Spirit. Life is not dependent strictly on bread and bread alone, but also on spirit. And that was the book that I guess I must have published that somewhere in the 90s. Okay, but that was to reflect.
You gave a talk years ago at Monmouth University. One of our listeners told me, I don't think she's going to be able to join tonight. I'm waiting to see if she pops on for a few minutes, but she said that you gave a very, very powerful talk at Monmouth when she was a student there about bringing spirituality into the therapy room. And I'd love to hear, I'd love to hear a little bit about that. But I do want to jump into structural family therapy, a little bit about the process of structural family therapy. Can you tell us a little bit about structural family therapy, what it is that you're looking for in a family session, what it is that you're looking at, and how you try to create shifts in that family system?
Okay, this was Sal Minuchin's idea. Okay, and he talked about families that were disorganized. They didn't have clear leadership in the families. The kids that we were teaching in the school that we had set up, none of them had a stable father in the family. They all had single parents, and the single parents were always women. Okay, so there was a lack of organization in these families in terms of hierarchy, authority, leadership. These are the families that were having real trouble. It doesn't mean that all the families in Harlem had real trouble. We got the families that were having real trouble, but the trouble they were having were not it was not just a trouble of inner psychological problems, but they had problems of getting families organized in such a way that they could function and be successful in their functioning, even with a single parent. Okay, and that's where the idea of structure came in, and so what I talked about when I wrote my book was, I said, you know, you really need to look at the distribution of power in those families. You need to look at the boundaries in the families. Who's the parent? You know, who are the older children? Who has responsibilities? Sal emphasized boundaries, but I wanted to take power and control and make that a separate concept, and then also have boundaries, consider boundaries in there, and then also the alliances, who was connecting with whom, and who was, because of those connections, was having most influence in the family. So I was thinking, you know, what organizes a system so that the system can work, especially in a family context. Okay, so I was just trying to take what Sal had given birth to and expand that to a large extent.
Now, Dr. Aponte, not everybody is familiar with family therapy. I happen to practice a lot of family therapy and familiar with some of the things you're saying, but could we break down some of the terms that you just used, which for people familiar with family therapy, they probably got it. But, you know, when you talk about alliances, for instance, okay, can you expand a little bit on how alliances are formed and how they affect family systems? For instance, if you'll have you know, in the triangle, you'll have a parent and child connected instead of having parent and parent connected. How does that happen? You know, what's the origin of that alliance? And B, how does it affect the family system? And then C, and perhaps most importantly, how do we create a shift to restructure who's aligned with who?
Well, I'll tell you a story, and which I think will speak to this. We had a fundraiser, and one of the organizations that we related to was the Philadelphia Phillies, and we tried to get some of the ball players to come and support the effort we were making to try to raise some money. And the first meeting that I had was with Mike Schmidt and Larry Boa and Gary Maddox. Gary Maddox was the center fielder for the Phillies at the time, was an African-American player.
Mike Schmidt, did he play first base?
He played third base.
Third base. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, and so they very enthusiastically said, "Yeah, we want to support your efforts." The one who was most interested was Gary Maddox, you know, and I said to Gary, "Well, you know, listen, I can talk to you about what this is about, but I think if you see it, it will make a difference." And we had recordings of interviews with families that I had and who had given us permission to show it to people. In fact, in Bread and Spirit, there's one chapter there that says, if I don't get simple, I cry. And that was the video of that session that I showed to Gary. What it was a family of 3 generations, a mother, and then a bunch of her children, and then a couple of the older girls had already had children of their own, and all of them came in at the same time. And when they came in to the session, they were just walking all over the room. I had no control over it, you know, it was like, this is what home is like for them. And when,
So in other words, you're in your observation of the family system, you're recognizing and identifying that there's no structure whatsoever. It's just the total chaos.
right,
Just from what you're seeing in the here and now.
right. So they came in, they were walking around the room, they were looking at the cameras, you know, and the mother was virtually sleeping, you know, while the session was going on. And I said to her, you know, are you okay though? What's the problem? Well, she just came from work. She had worked all night long, you know, cleaning offices. That was her job. So the woman was completely exhausted, you know, and she just let the kids work things out for themselves. And I had them talking, and then once they started to talk, then they started to talk about how, you know, mom would be out at work, and how young guys would come in and out of the house and go upstairs with some of the girls, and things were going on that shouldn't be going on. And there was nobody who was in charge of things. And one of the girls, I think she was a teenager. I don't remember her age, but she must have been somewhere around 14 or 15. And she would be the one trying to get order with her older siblings and younger siblings. And she would try to get them quiet, try to get them to sit down. And I could see she was not succeeding, but she was the only one who was really making an effort to get things orderly. And so then I asked the mother, I said, could you ask everybody else in the family to go downstairs to the waiting area except this one young lady, and I'd like her to stay here with you and me. And so they did. And so the girl started to make kind of jokes about what was going on. And I commented on how, you know, she was desperately trying to get order. And now I'm seeing her, you know, making jokes and being very lighthearted about it. And I commented on that, and then she stopped, and then she started to cry. And she said, you know, when I get simple, I cry. So then what was really inside of her came out, and it was all tears. Okay, it was the fear of the disorganization that was going on, and seeing her mother stressed out, and she was trying to take care of her mother. Okay, and she was the one who was the quote identified patient by the school. And she said, you know, I go in and I would take a test, and I would get a very good grade, and the teacher would accuse me of cheating because I hadn't been going to school on a regular basis because I was trying to take care of things at home. The girl was very smart, and so she would do very well without studying much, but then she was accused of cheating, and she felt completely discouraged. So
what I'm hearing, so far,
experience.
Yeah. So far I'm hearing a family with a parentified teenage daughter who is taking full responsibility of the family. The mother is not present because she's so overwhelmed. The family is chaotic. The daughter is trying to create some order, and you're learning this just by observing the family system and then identifying it with them. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
And now the girl gets to speak out her heart. You call her out on her, you know, on the dissonance where she's kind of lighthearted, you know, suddenly lighthearted when nobody else is there, and she falls apart and crumbles and says, it's too much for me.
And that's when I turned to the mother.
Here's the intervention. This is where the shift is going to happen, right?
This is structural family therapy.
Okay.
And I said to the mother, you know, she's trying to help you to bring order into this family of yours, and you're trying to support this family by working all night long, and then you're too tired to deal with the family when you get home. So this wasn't an irresponsible woman. This was a very, very responsible woman. But
And that sounded like a very
she could handle it.
validating, that sounds like a very empathic observation. You're
Yeah.
saying, right, you're commenting, you're doing all you can to sustain the family, and your daughter's really struggling.
Yes. And this is the video that I showed to the ball player, and he's watching the video, and he begins to cry, and I said, "What's happening?" He said, "This is my family.
My family.
This is the family that I came from." He was from Oakland in California, but this was the family I came from. And then
was he the IP? Was he the parentified child?
This is the center fielder for the Philadelphia Phillies.
Yeah, and was he in his family system? Was he the
I don't know. He didn't say that. He just said, "This is my family," and he went heart and soul into supporting the
project
fundraising. He really completely committed to it. And that's what really said to me, family therapy has to consider the structure, not only of the family, which Sal was emphasizing, but it also has to consider the family in the context of the community that it's in. Okay, and if we're going to work with families that are disadvantaged, okay, we have to be considering the individual. We have to consider the family members themselves and the structure of the family itself, and we have to consider the environment to make sure that environment supports them.
But okay, so that's great. So it's almost like you're going up generations.
Yeah, we're looking at the whole ecosystem.
You're looking at the whole ecosystem, expanding to the ecosystem beyond the family. But you can't bring the ecosystem into the therapy room. At best, you can go out and try to influence the ecosystem. How on earth? I mean, that sounds like a huge undertaking. How do you influence?
But that's why I then started to call the legislators, representing, have them come visit the clinic, and the city council members, and I had them come, walk through the clinic, get to see what we were doing, get them interested in it, and then I asked them, with all of you have offices, and you have people in the offices that people can call, and then they could make things happen. I'd like to have a name. I'd like to have a telephone number that I could then give to the families that come in here, so that then when they make a phone call, that somebody's going to really answer the phone and really pay attention to what they needed. And one after another, they were very glad to do that. So that I gave those numbers also to the workers who were working in the clinic, so that then, when somebody needs to work with welfare or needs to deal with the police, so needs to deal with a hospital, okay, here's a person you can call, and they already have been told, this is the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic. That's why they have your name. That's why they have your number, and they're calling in order to get help for this particular family that's making the phone call. Okay, so I try to make a connection, a personal connection between these individuals, these families, and the community that they were living in, so that community would be there for them and to serve them.
That's really incredible.
Okay, it was bringing structure into the family, but it was also trying to bring some structure in the community that would serve the families, that would serve the individuals within the family.
Amazing. Wow. Okay, I just want to remind everyone, for those of you who have questions, I think we just got a really nice snapshot synopsis of the idea behind structural family therapy, and what the mechanism is. It's basically, what I'm hearing is, observing and understanding how the family system works by seeing what it looks like in the here and now, and I'm sure asking questions and digging a little, and then making those observations, being empathic to them, and then allowing the family to shift by restructuring who's in charge, who the responsibility is on and who it's not on, and sort of freeing up the parentified child. We didn't talk much about the alliances, but I can well imagine that alliances are created by other tensions that go on in the family system. Just reminding everyone, if you want to ask a question, please use the more button on the bottom right of your screen and raise your hand, and Dr. Aponte will be happy to answer. Let's talk a little bit about alliances, and then I want to get into another exciting topic, which is the person of the therapist. But let's talk a little bit first about alliances. How are alliances created?
The alliances is that, you know, within families themselves, you know, very often the kids would ally with one another, because the parents, there was only one parent. The parent may be, the mother may be addicted to drugs. The mother may be working very hard at night and working very well there, but then is too tired to keep up with the kids and to manage the household.
Mhm.
So that the kids would form their own little subgroups, or they would then get into gangs, and that would be their family. That would be the alliances that they would be dependent upon. But they couldn't be without a system to work with. So they would create their own systems. So they formed their alliances there, and then those alliances had their own boundaries, their own distribution of power, who had control, who was able to do this and that and the other, because they had the alliances, because they were able to do things with themselves and for themselves, sometimes for good, but also sometimes for bad. Okay, so
Well,
you had to
sounds a little
consider all
complicated.
aspects of a system, you know, and what organizes a system, and you have to pay attention to that. Well, then you're working with these families so that you're not just looking for individual psychopathology, but you're looking for structure and organization so that the family could function the way a family needs to function within a community that should be functioning for the families, but is often not functioning for the families.
Okay, in the example that you're giving, where you have children who create an alliance with one another, I can see that as much more complex to break that than in a system where, say, you have a child aligning with a parent against another parent, wherein somewhere in the conscious mind or less conscious mind of the parents, they really want to be together. And for whatever family pathological reason, something became misaligned. And so if we create that observation, and with some encouragement, we can potentially get the two parents to realign with each other and put the child down on the bottom of the triangle. But when you have two siblings who align, let's just say against a parent or something like that, what's the motive for the children to break that up, or is there any way for the parents to break that pattern among the children?
Well, you know, what it says is that we're social beings, and we're not meant to try to manage our lives all by ourselves. We're meant to depend on one another. And if we cannot depend on the parents, then we depend on siblings, or we depend on the gang that's outside the neighborhood. Okay, so everybody's looking for some kind of support, okay, in order to be able to manage successfully. That's what we're dealing with. And so what Sal was trying to do was to let's focus on getting the family organized so that they can function well and support the kid, so the kid would know, I can depend on my parents, or I can depend on my mother to help me with all that I needed to function.
So the assumption was that if we can restructure the parenting aspect of the family, then the children won't need each other to rely on, and they'll be able to be more dependent on the parents.
Right, they will always need each other, but they will ultimately depend on the parents to make things happen. And the parent becomes somebody that they not only love, but is somebody they can also respect and go to for help and for support in order to accomplish whatever they needed to accomplish.
And is there an assumption that once that opportunity is opened, the children will naturally gravitate more to the parents than they will to peers or siblings?
What it does, it balances. It becomes a healthier balance.
Okay.
Okay, I have a home base, my home base is not the kids in the street who are forming gangs. My home base is my family. That's where
Right.
the strength is. Okay, but I also need my friends and so on. But I have something at home
So
that
this,
helps me to feel a certain independence so that I can make up my own mind and I don't have to follow the gang.
beautiful. So a sort of connectedness and a cohesiveness and a camaraderie that the family is bringing, so that the kids in the street are just friends outside, in the outside world, not in the internal world.
Yeah,
of the
but
child.
that's also where the spirituality came in, because I also had some of our African American staff go to all the Black churches in the neighborhood
Mhm.
and to say, look, we're here for you. And you know, this is our number, this is the people who you could talk to. We will offer you services, you know, as soon as you need the services. We try to bring in something that was not only a source of referrals, but also something that gave meaning to their lives.
Mhm.
And these ministers gave meaning to their lives. These ministers were leaders within their own churches, and they were bringing something that said, look, life is something more than just what you see on the street.
Mhm.
Okay, there's a God. Okay, there's prayer. This is a whole other dimension of life that we can speak to. And so I wanted us to make a connection for these families with the churches that were there and the ministers that were in the neighborhood. Okay, so that was another dimension that I thought was really critical for them.
Wow, that's a really broad bringing together. You know, you kind of created something very broad and created a community. It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
so it's an ecosystem.
An
It's
ecosystem.
it's looking at that ecosystem and let's make it work for these families. Okay, and it worked very well.
Okay, can we take a question from Basi? Basi's got a question for you, Dr. Aponte.
Okay,
Hi,
Go.
thank you so much for your presentation. It's unbelievably helpful and clear. I'm really appreciating it. My question is as follows. What I'm understanding is that in order to help the children in a family where the system and the structure is skewed, you need to bring in the community help, because as I work with many families like this, and where my struggle is where if the parent is limited or addicted to something and refusing to either acknowledge or change or unable to change, so then even with the outside help, which we often bring in, they still never become the parent of the home. They're in therapy and we have people coming to the home to help with homework and structured bedtimes and, you know, so I was just wondering if there's a way, and I work directly with the parents a lot and, you know, try to empower them and a lot of practical solutions. But, you know, if the dad's an alcoholic and the mom is cognitively limited and just can't understand how to run the home or how to parent the children when they're fighting or refusing to do homework and all that, they don't look up to these parents with respect. They don't turn to them as the parents. They do a lot of the triangulation, either aligning with one parent, two of the kids, one family I'm thinking of, two of the kids align with each other. Is there anything more I can be doing, or this is what it is?
well, you know, you by yourself can't do it all. You know, I certainly could not have done it without Jim Lester. I mean, he was very instrumental because he had influence in the Black community. Okay, he was a natural leader. The people in the community respected him, and so when he set up this school, the people were looking up to him, and because he was who he was, okay, I was able to get more of the community and more of the legislators, because they also knew him, to come in and to give us their telephone numbers and make themselves available when the families from our clinic called there and called for help. And if the families couldn't do that themselves, then our workers would have that name and that telephone number, and then they would make the phone call in order to get whatever service was needed from that community. from that hospital, from that school. For example, when it came to the schools, they would often refer kids to us. And what my instruction to intake workers were, if the school is having a real problem with this kid, with the teachers, and really becoming part of the school system, so that the school serve the kid, okay, tell them that we want to have our first session in the school with the teacher and the principal or vice principal, okay, and we want to bring the family in, or at least the mother or people who are responsibility in the family, and we want to have our first session there. And then the reaction we got from the school was, well, we're very busy and we have our schedule and so on, and we can't bring all these people together. I said, well, that's fine. When you can do that, call me back. Well, they called back, and they finally got the idea that they better say yes to that first session and work together so that our workers could work with their teachers and with their vice principals, so that the school would organize itself in order to be of help. So I wrote an article sometime back then about this model of work, and it was really very successful. But it was a matter of how I could organize our clinic and our workers with the help of legislators and city councilmen and so on, to make connections with the schools, with the hospitals and so on, so that there would be a system that would be there available to these families when these families needed help. Okay, so that the workers by themselves are as helpless as the family if you don't create a connection and channels of communication, okay, with these institutions, using whatever power that clinic has. It has to act as part of the community, and has to become very active and engaged with the community, so that it could mobilize the community, so that the community would be available to them. It's something that I had to learn I learned from myself, because I had years later, when I was already married in Philadelphia, my father called me one day and says, I'm dying. I hadn't seen him in a while. I had already arranged for all kinds of help from my family there, but he says, I'm dying. He says, he says, I went to the hospital and they examined me, and they said, there's nothing they can do for me, that I'm okay. And they sent me back, and I said, well, that's it? He said, that was it. I said, all right. I was supposed to do a workshop in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and go within a couple of days there. And so I picked up the phone and I called Lincoln Hospital, which was our local hospital. And I said, I want to talk to whoever is the chief of this hospital. Not knowing whether I would actually get that person, they put him on the phone. And I said, this is what happened to my father. This is what he tells me. I'm supposed to go out of town. I can't go out of town. Okay, he says he's dying. I believe him. He's not a stupid man. Okay, and your hospital just throws him out. The guy says, all right, I'll tell your father to come back in. I'll take care of him, and you can go ahead on your trip. I said, I'm not leaving until you call me back and tell me that my father has been admitted. Well, he called me back later in the day. Your father's been admitted. We're taking care of him. I flew to Ann Arbor, went to sleep. In the middle of the night, my wife calls and says, your father died. Okay, but he died in the hospital. Okay, and he would not have even had that had I not made that phone call. But I was doing what I was trying to do with the families that we were working with. We needed to set up a system so that the community was responsive to the families themselves, no matter what their situation was.
So by taking some of
the worker couldn't do it alone. The institution that the worker was connected to had to have the institution backing up that worker in order to accomplish that work in the community.
And so then by helping the family, by reaching out to the schools, getting the children, their individual therapists, getting someone in the home to help teach the mom hands-on structure, routine, by taking these stressors off the family, that's the hope that the parents will be able to connect with the children in a positive way, bond with them, and then be looked up to with some
Well,
sort of respect or
Parents
security.
begin, the parents begin to get a sense of self-respect. When I make
Right.
a phone call, they listen to me. Things happen, and so the parents then are not feeling totally helpless. Okay, so
Right.
the parents then gain in status in their own minds and as well as in the minds of their children.
Children.
Okay, and
Okay.
the community that's supposed to be serving them, okay, is now conscious of them and aware of them and responsive, because we're trying to create a network, okay, so that it takes structural family therapy for beyond the family and takes the whole ecosystem so that the ecosystem works the way it's supposed to work.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Let's move over into this very fascinating topic. Dr. Aponte wrote a book called The Person of the Therapist Training Model. Okay, and it's really, my understanding is it's about the use of self. And I watched your interview with Dr. What was it, Stephanie Brooks? Was that her name?
Yes, yes.
Stephanie Brooks on your website. For those of you who want to take a look at the website, it's harryjaponte.com. And in the book section, there's a video of this interview. And it seems that you created something called POTT, is it? Person of the Therapist.
Yeah, POT,
Training?
I call it POTT.
Yeah, well, POT's
Awesome
not,
Therapist Training Program, right.
POT's too popular these days, so we're not going to say POT. But,
Okay.
okay, so tell me a little bit about what the objective of that training is and what it's done for therapists and some of the really creative ways that you've been training therapists and using the use of self.
Well, I had the experience of going, to Fordham, getting my master's there, and then from there, going to the Menninger Clinic to get a year of postgraduate training. But you have to realize, given where I came from, I applied to Menninger's that was in Topeka, Kansas for that postmaster's training, not knowing anything about it except it sounded very important. That's as much as I knew about it. Okay, and so I made my application, they accepted me there. And then the people there at that time, movie stars, governors, people who were the heads of major corporations in the United States, people coming from other countries. And I, as a social worker, I was supposed to, work with the families of the patients who were going into the hospital. I didn't know how to talk to them. I had never actually talked to white Anglo-Saxon Protestants in my life.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you're Puerto Rican from the Bronx,
right?
From Harlem.
The white people I knew were Jews and Irish and Italians, and they all had their gangs,
Right.
This was my experience, and these people were absolutely intimidated me. I didn't know how to deal with them. I didn't know how to talk to them. I didn't know how to communicate with them. I didn't know how to see them as human beings. Okay, I didn't know how to see them as people who were hurting, people who were failing in their own lives, in their marriages, in their families, and so on. And so I very much appreciated, the struggle and the pain that I had to go through in order to get to a place where I can look at somebody who was I could only imagine who they were because I had never had direct relationship with them, and I could really care about them. I could really make a connection with them, and I thought, my God, this is what people, these white Anglo-Saxon people who are working with people in my community, this is what they're experiencing. I'm experiencing it from the other angle. I can't relate to them, and so how can I provide a service that they can trust if I can't communicate with them, if I can't feel something of what they feel, if I can't feel their humanity, and then I know you're talking about that
particular population that you dealt with. I think we could all relate to this on our own level with populations, cultures that we can't connect with, that we've never been involved with. So
Yeah, and what I eventually, make a long story short, okay, the work on preparing therapists in terms of themselves, okay, goes back to Sigmund Freud and dealing with countertransference, okay, and then Virginia Satir and then Murray Bowen. They all began to pay attention to, over the years, you need to pay attention to the person who's doing the therapy. What are their biases? What are their hangups? What are their issues? How does that affect how they relate to people, what they see as dysfunctional or functional? What kind of ideals do they have? What kind of inner resources do they have? And I began to think of that. I said, I went through my own psychoanalysis when I was at Menninger's. They encouraged all of us to do that. And I remember going in and saying to myself, I'm going to go in here, I'm going to resolve all of these hangups that I have growing up where I grew up, because my family was a very dysfunctional family. I'm an only child, but it was a very dysfunctional family that I grew up in. Okay. And I was very conscious of my personal issues. And I thought, well, I'm going to go into psychoanalysis. That's going to fix up all of my problems. I'm going to be a terrific therapist because of that. Well, I went through the psychoanalysis. I got a lot of insight. I still had the same problems by the end of it, and then I eventually realized, something, when I meet with these individuals, whoever they are, whatever their culture is, okay, they're hurting. And the reason why I can feel with them is because I'm hurting also. I have my own problems. I have my own struggles, and who doesn't, of one kind or another. And if I'm able to be honest with myself and be in touch with that and take responsibility for my own issues and work with them, I can use that struggle of mine, that journey of mine, in terms of trying to connect with, to be able to function in society. Okay, I can use that as a way of better resonating with what they're feeling. So then they became human beings, whoever they were. I remember an Orthodox Jewish couple that came to me, and every time they came to me, they said, well, we always go and talk to our rabbi about what you said to see if what you said was all right.
It's kosher.
Yes. And after a while, they said, the rabbi said, you don't need to come back anymore. I trust this man who's working with you because he's doing the right thing with you. Okay. And then they invited me to some of their
events,
festivities, but there were
events, family events, or
they were very, I could describe some of these celebrations that they had and rituals that they had, that allowed, I was able to get a little bit of insight into them. They brought me into their world. Okay. And I remember at Menninger's dealing with some rancher, okay, older guy. I didn't think I could relate to him, but I finally did was learn to relate to the guy. At the end of the work, he gave me a hand-carved wallet as a gift. We really connected. I began to learn that you really can connect to people who are very different from you, but you can only do that if you can be connected with your own struggles, with your own humanity, with your own vulnerability, and if you can take responsibility for that and do something about it, so that you also understand how hard it is to change, how hard it is to overcome some of your own hangups, some of the trauma that you experienced as a child. Okay, it's with you and it's with them. In other words, a lot of the work that was the focus that over the years on working with individuals was fix them, fix the therapist, so the therapist doesn't contaminate the issues, don't contaminate the therapy. Well, you'd never fix them 100%. And the reality is that Sigmund Freud, he actually wrote an article that said, that a person who's going to become a psychoanalyst needs to go into psychoanalysis every few years, interminably. It was without actually saying it. He was saying the psychoanalysis is not going to cure you. You're going to be struggling, going to have your issues for the rest of your life. That's part of being human.
But I love how you described it as that actually enhances the process of the therapy, because if you're not fixed, so to say, then you're not above the client. You're in the journey with them by not being fixed and being able to resonate more with them.
Yes, because when they start talking about their issues, I think back about my own issues that relate in some way or another to what they're dealing with.
Mhm.
They don't know that I'm doing that,
Right.
but I am doing that, and I'm feeling something of what they're feeling.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and so I try to train people who want to be therapists to say, look, the struggles you're having, if you take responsibility for them, if you're aware of them, okay, if you do that, okay, and you're able to articulate that to yourself, then when you work with clients, it becomes an asset. It makes it possible for you to empathize with them.
Because you're accessing your own empathy for them.
That's right. So that it's because I'm human and I'm vulnerable, I then can relate to your vulnerability and your humanity. I don't look down on you and say, I got it all together, I'm going to fix you, you poor thing. It's like one human being to another human being. I have a sense of what you're dealing with. I have a sense of what you're struggling with. I have a sense of what you need, because I know something of that through my own life experience. And that's part of the training that I do with people who want to be therapists.
By the way, I've heard from many therapists that they find that working with populations that they're less familiar with actually enhances the therapeutic process, because it forces them to drop any assumption. There's no assumptions for them to make. So you're jumping into the client's world without any understanding or knowledge of what their world looks like. And now you have to be truly curious. And so in a sense, it actually enhances the process.
Yeah, I often tell the story about working with a family, and I did this as part of a workshop at University of Connecticut, and the father had punched his adolescent son, and he was very upset about that, and he brought his family in for therapy. He didn't understand why he had done that. Long story short, okay, I find out while we're talking that his mother is dying, and he's trying to take care of her by himself, not turning to his family for any kind of support. Okay. And one day, so I said that once I learned that, I said, tell me again the story about when you hit your son. Well, I was in the house, I was walking down the hallway, and my adolescent son, he's using language that's inappropriate to my wife, to his mother. Okay. And he was being disrespectful. And so when I got there, I just lost it and I hit him. And I said, well, do you see any connection between that and your feeling about your mother who's dying now, and who you just told me she raised you by herself? You're an adopted son, adopted child. She raised you by herself, and now you're taking care of her. And we went through the whole thing. I had him go through all he was going through, and the fact that he was trying to do it all by himself. And by the end of the session, he allowed his family to come in and say, yeah, we want to help you, want to be there for you. And everything looked really, really good. And he says to me, I really want to thank you. You really understood what I was going through. And I said, I'm really glad, that you appreciate what I did. I'm glad I was able to help you. When they walked off out of the room, it was the closed circuit TV. I said to the audience, my mother died 3 weeks ago. I knew exactly what he was going through.
Wow.
I'm having trouble talking right now. I'm getting
Wow.
emotional. But
so you really connect. The closer the connection.
Yeah, I relived everything he was going through.
Wow.
Through my memory of what I had to go through. So I knew what to ask. I knew how to be supportive of him. I knew what he was talking about. That's right.
Wow.
Okay, that's just one example of the kind of thing that I always try to do. Which is to get therapists to be very aware of their own personal struggles, what they're going through, and be committed to doing something about it, and have that available to themselves when they're dealing with families. Not that they have to tell them what they're going through. Most of the time it's better to not tell them, but you can resonate with them, you can
That's right.
feel with them, you can hurt with them, okay? And that gives you a better insight into who they are and where they are in their struggle, so that you're not just dealing with a label of this person is, you know, is dealing with depression or is dealing with this, that, or the other. It's not just a label, it's
It's a human experience.
That's
Beautiful.
correct. You got it.
Beautiful. Naftali, we have a question from Naftali. Go ahead, Naftali.
Pleasure to be able to listen to you, Dr. Aponte. In my grad school, I had 3 separate classes that showed one
Could you
of
speak
your-
up a little bit? I'm having
It's a little hard to hear you.
Sure.
I have watched in grad school a few times one of your videos, and I've noticed that, like you're saying now, about being genuine, about being with the client where they are. There was one session that you had where you were very real with the client. I think you, if I remember correctly, you joined the family and you called the client like a baby or something like that, because that's what they were calling her. That's what she was calling herself. Something like that. And there's like a shift in the family, and like I thought it was very real, and I was very confused what you were doing. It seemed like strange, but then the family had a shift, and I learned later on this was more of a paradoxical intervention. You joined, you prescribed, I don't know, you joined, you did what the family was doing, and all of a sudden the client changed the way the pastor was going on. So my question is, I want to know your view of what of paradoxical interventions are.
Well, you know, I don't recall calling anybody a baby, but I'm sure I must have done something that was paradoxical. Okay, my point is, you know, how do I get somebody's attention? You know, how do I get them to take seriously what I'm trying, a message that I'm trying to get across? And so it may not be by being nice and supportive to them, but it may be saying something to them that startles them and gets them to pay attention to what's really going on. The only example that I can give you that I can remember is of working with a couple, a man and a woman, and white, Anglo-Saxon, wealthy people, and the woman, I could see she was closed off to him. And I said to her, you know, you're shutting yourself off from this man. You know, she said, yes, I'm afraid of him. You know, and he got enraged and he got up from his chair and he went over her and he started to yell at her to the point I thought he was going to hit her. And I was getting ready to start to jump in there and get involved. You know, and I said, I don't think this is going to be good therapy if I jump on this guy. Anyway, he's bigger than I am, you know. But what I did was something that was opposite of my growing up years taught me. I got into plenty of fights as a kid, and you never showed your fear. But what I did with this guy is I said to him, John, right now I'm afraid of you. Okay, something that I would have never done in my life. The guy froze. He said, you, Harry, you're afraid of me? We had a relationship. I said, yeah. I thought it looks to me like you're gonna hit her. And then if I'm gonna try to stop you, okay, you're gonna probably hit me. You know, the guy just stopped and he started to cry. And he turned to his wife and said, is this what I'm doing? He didn't realize what he was doing to her. And she said, that's exactly what I'm feeling right now, what he's talking about. Okay, the guy just softened up, opened up himself, and then we were able to do some work with the couple. I could not have done it if I had not revealed to him my fear of him, okay, which is I don't usually open up and tell people what I'm experiencing, but I knew that that would have an effect on him because of who he was, the relationship that we had. So you have to know how to use that self, and you have to be trained on how to use that self.
What happened? What happened when what happened to him when he heard you say that?
Well, what happened to him was that he saw himself in a way he had never seen himself. Okay, he just saw his wife as a cold bitch that was just not giving to him and not relating to him. And he had a good relationship with me. When I said to him that I was afraid of him, he suddenly realized, oh, this isn't just my wife, this is me. I'm the one who's creating this. Okay, and he trusted me enough so that he opened himself up in order to then see his wife in a different light than the way he was seeing her before. But you have to train therapists. People want to be therapists. You have to know yourself and be humble enough to realize I have hang-ups and I'm going to have hang-ups to the day I die. Okay, but I can use these hang-ups, these struggles, if I take responsibility for them, I can use them in order to be able to empathize with the struggles of my clients. Okay, and that will open me up and I will have deeper insight into what they're going through than I would otherwise by just trying to take them at their word. You know, a physician who's dealing physically with people can use x-rays and MRIs and all kinds of instruments. Therapists don't have that, okay? But the therapist has their experience of the client, the experience of the family, the experience of the individual. You're experiencing something, and that should then relate to your own personal experience in such a way that you can have some sense of what that person is going through, some real sense, some real feeling for it. And then you can decide, now, how am I going to use this relationship in a way that they'll hear me, in a way that they'll allow me to have access to them so that I can be of help to them.
Thank you.
Dr.
You're welcome.
Aponte, can I ask you, what is that painting on the wall behind you? I'm super curious about that painting.
My wife and I went to a secondhand place where they were selling all kinds of things, and she looked at that painting. She said, "That's what you must have looked like as a kid." I said, "Well, it kind of is me as a kid." And she said, "I want to buy that painting." So we bought the painting. So that's my wife's idea of what I look like
And
as a
what is
kid.
the boy holding in his hand?
He's holding a candle, and he has a candle, and he has a hand in front of the candle.
Okay, interesting. One last question. The PAT training that you created,
Yes.
can you tell me what it is? What is that training and how does it work?
The
The self of the therapist, the person of the therapist.
Okay. Very briefly.
At Drexel, I think you used it in Drexel University, right?
Well, I was using it before I went to Drexel, and then it became formalized at Drexel, and then I use it in various forms, and I've had people from different parts of the world who are beginning to use it now. Actually, we're getting correspondence from Africa and from Europe and Asia from people now who are using this model. But basically, what it is 3 stages where I meet with the individual therapist in the presence of peers, and I say to them, I want to know what issue of yours really dominates your life and that you have to struggle with. And I understand I'm asking you to reveal things that you would not normally talk about, but if there is something you don't want to talk about, I don't want you to bring it up. But if you can talk about something that you know you struggle with that you feel you're too shy, that you're too dominating, that it's hard for you to form relationships, whatever it is, if we can talk about that, and I can help you to understand that better and its roots, okay, so that you get more comfortable with it and you realize everybody else shares this. I have my own, you have yours, everybody, all the other students here have theirs. And then we spend some time working on that so that they then say, okay, this is my issue. This is what I struggle with. And this is the thing that, it affects the way I relate to people because I'm not very warm with people, or I have to control the situation with people, or I have very little self-confidence. All of these things, they would bring it up. So I go with every single student to come up in the presence of their peers, and they talk about their, what I call their signature theme. And I want them to take this as something, this is normal, this is human, this is what I'm going to use to empathize with my clients. And then we take that, and then I have them do role plays with other students as if they're therapists, and I stop them. What are you thinking now? What are you feeling? What does this remind you of? And I get them accustomed to normalizing their own personal struggles and using that in order to empathize and connect with their clients. And then we have them meet with families. They could be families, and at Drexel we have families that we have actors, ordinary people who did get paid to come in and play families, couples and families. And while they're doing that work, then I interrupt them. I have a little bug in the ear, and I say to them, you're ignoring the father. Okay, you're being too controlling with the mother. Come on out, let's talk about that. And so I help them to use what they're experiencing or what they're not paying attention to about themselves to better relate to and understand what these families and individuals are dealing with, so then they can have a deeper sense of what their struggle is and not just take them at what they report. Okay, so they're using.
So you're bringing them inside themselves and bringing them themselves inside the therapy room. And
Right.
you're doing this experientially with students so that by the time they're seeing real families, they've got a much better sense.
Right, and I was supervised. I supervise a lot nowadays virtually, and just this last week, this therapist presented a couple where they were both suspicious of one another. They didn't trust one another. They were always fighting because of that. They weren't respecting each other, and so on and so on. And it really looked like a hopeless thing. And they were trying to live together. They weren't married, and then they separated. Then they're going to come back together again, and so on and so on. And I said, well, this is, I said, I don't like these people that you're describing to me, And she said, I don't either. I can't relate to them, And I said, well, then we talked about how she could work with them. And then she asked me the question. She said, but what about me? What do I do with me in my relationship with them? And then I said, what you do with them is that what you do with yourself in terms of your own life experience. Okay, you look at their pain and you think about your own pain, and you try to use your pain to help you to have insight, so that you know what to ask, what kind of support they need, a better sense of timing with them about when to use this intervention, when to use that intervention. So it doesn't matter what model of therapy you follow, the therapy is always conducted in a relationship.
Yes.
And you have to be able to make that relationship work. And that relationship will make those interventions work.
Right.
But you have to be honest with yourself and aware of yourself, and you need to be present with all of who you are as a human being. And it changes them completely as therapists.
Sure.
And it
sure.
also has an impact on their personal lives.
You say you have to make you have to make the relationship work, and I like to say you have to work the relationship. That's
Yes.
really a lot of what goes on is to work the relationship. Wow. Well, I really appreciate that you agreed to join us tonight. I know it's late at night in Philadelphia, same time as here. It's almost 10:30. We've really enjoyed your videos on psychotherapy.net, and more so, I just found myself very struck by that video on your website describing the person of the therapist concept. And I think on that video, I believe there are some of those role plays between students. Was it students of Drexel?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So you could actually watch these real. I don't know if those are role plays or those are actual discussions that they were having, right?
Yeah,
their challenges,
they were talking about
their own personal
training.
challenges.
Yes, they talked about themselves and how the training affected them, and then how that changed how they work with families.
Amazing. So it's a worthwhile watch, in my opinion. I got through most of it. But again, thank you for joining us and for all your contributions, besides the Philadelphia region, but to the mental health profession at large. I have a question. Sometimes I ask people who are coming on in age, as you are in your mid-80s. Is there something in particular you want the mental health community to know of you for, or remember you for, what your greatest impact was in the mental health field?
Well, if I could have any kind of influence about having therapists work with and through their own humanity when they try to connect with their clients, I would be really pleased to see that would happen. Okay, because too often, therapists try to think of themselves, I've got it all together, and these people are all broken. And so, and when they say that I've got it all together, they're lying to themselves, because none of us have it all together,
Mhm.
you know.
And they're also
but
doing the clients a disservice
yes,
by
you
believing
know.
that.
So if that legacy can contribute something to improving the relationship with clients, so that therapists can be more effective, if there's a heaven, which I hope to get to, you know, I can look down and say, oh, thank God, you know, something good came out of the efforts that I was making.
And I honestly, honest to goodness, I would love to partner with you in that mission, because that's something that's very meaningful to me. And maybe we'll talk, like I said, maybe we'll talk after the show at some point later this week or something, and figure out how I might be able to partner with you in that mission.
Be glad to do it.
Okay. Well, good night, and thanks again.
Okay,
night, everyone.
thank you
Hope to
for
see
the
you next week.
opportunity.
You're very welcome, and thanks for honoring us.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. It was amazing.
Thank you.